Well, it looks like we might have a bit of a lighter crew today, which is great because this is a super participatory session and we're going to be looking for lots of engagement from folks. So it'll be fun to have a small group. And I'm going to ask you all if possible to turn your cameras on. It just helps us know like you're here and you're paying attention. I know, Kyle, you're on service and you're bopping around. So if you can't turn
And
your camera
I
on,
actually don't have a camera on this
you don't even
computer,
have a camera.
so
Okay.
my bad. I forgot to bring my laptop today, but
We'll just all imagine your beautiful face, Kyle.
Right.
And and but otherwise, if you're able to turn your camera on, that's great. But if not, we're actually gonna do a fair amount of cold calling during this session today. And so I am gonna call on folks whether you have your camera on or not. And I'm just gonna ask if you're like otherwise engaged, you're not able to participate in this moment, that's okay. Just either pop something into the chat or unmute and say, hey, can you come back to me? That's no problem at all. But I think, Michael, if you're good, we should just go ahead and start. I think I know many of you. I am Amy Trowbridge. I'm one of the founders of this group, along with Naomi and Catherine, and agreed to present today. And I now only give talks with Michael Light. I don't do it by myself anymore. So Michael, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to this group as well.
Sure. Hi, all. I'm Michael Light. I'm a social worker at Harborview Medical Center in a homeless palliative care outreach team. I'm also co-director of the Palliative Care Training Center at the University of Washington with Amy. I teach for Honoring Choices Northwest and Vital Talk, and I do anything Amy asked me to do.
All right. Thanks, Michael. And thanks. I see folks are kind of popping on. We're going to start with an easy question today. We're going to use the chat quite a bit. So I want y'all to just open your chat box and just pop in your thoughts to this really hard hitting question here. Is a hot dog a sandwich? Keisha has some thoughts right from the get-go. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Lots of no's. I don't know. Happy either way, Rachel. Okay, awesome. Love it. Hadley is sort of a maybe. Okay. I mean, it's meat and bread, right? Is sandwich in the name? Interesting. Good question. Catherine says negative. Okay. Love it, love it, love it. Keep the thoughts coming. I'm gonna move us along. To start our lesson today, actually, we're talking about strategies for engaging learners in your didactic large group or small group presentations, how to keep your whole group engaged. And we're going to talk about kind of three main strategies that we use. But to start off, we're actually going to start with a little demo. And so we're just going to spend the next 10 or so minutes talking about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And there is a lot of expertise among this group in many different things. And I'm hoping that there is some expertise in peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as well that we can tap into. I see some more participants are coming on. So I'm gonna say one more time that as we are teaching about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and later in the talk, we are going to do some cold calling, or the idea of, calling on particular people to shout out an answer or to give their thoughts on a question rather. And this is just a way to help us keep folks engaged and keeps folks participating. And it also helps us hear from more of you. It's totally fine if you don't have an answer or you're not ready to come off mute and talk. You can type into the chat, come back to me, or you can unmute and say, come back to me, I'm not quite ready yet. And we'll talk to a few other people and we'll come back to you. No worries at all. All right.
Okay. So as Amy said, we're going to be talking a little bit about a cultural icon, the PB&J sandwich. And I want first everyone to take a moment and imagine you're opening a sandwich shop and you want to have on a menu the perfect PB&J sandwich. And so we're going to spend 1 minute, find something to write with, whether it's a Word document, a notepad, whatever it is. And I just want you to spend 1 minute imagining what are the qualities of your perfect PB&J sandwich? What makes your perfect PB&J? 1 minute silent writing. Go ahead and do that. I'll time us. About 10 more seconds here. Okay. With whatever you've written about your perfect PB&J, I want you to look over what you wrote and identify 2 characteristics or qualities of that PB&J that you think are the most important, the most essential for making your perfect sandwich. So whether you underline, circle them, just find those 2 items, 2 key features. Once you have them, I would love to see if you just want to enter into the chat, what are the 2 key features of your perfect PB&J sandwich? Feel free to enter it in the chat and hit send. Okay, something's coming through here. Let's see. So we've got the bread, soft bread, toasty, crunchy. Lots of bread comments. Ooh, very specific. Art guy, do you mind telling me a little bit about your choices and why you chose them here? I see brioche and chunky homemade strawberry jam.
Sure. I like my bread to be crispy on the outside and soft on the inside for my PB&J. And
Okay.
there is something nostalgic and delicious about homemade strawberry jam for me that if I can have that on my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, that makes the perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich in my mind.
Gotcha. Okay, so there's some textural components to it, and there's also some like homemade qualities. Thanks so much for that, Arca. Robin, I see you've got a slightly different answer. Do you mind coming off mute, Robin Williams? Tell us a little bit about what you answered and why.
Oh, see, I'm kind of the opposite. The bread has to be super, super soft. It has to be white bread. It has to be Wonder Bread, like the worst kind of bread for you. On the first day that you buy it from the store, maybe the second, and then just the right ratio of peanut butter to jam.
Cool. Okay, great. So we're already seeing some contrast here, some like maybe stark contrast between the textural components and maybe even like I'm curious, like some of the nostalgia about like where these things come from that make these things a perfect sandwich for you. So even when we look down this list, the variety of options, we can see that there's a pretty big diversity in what makes a perfect PB&J.
All right. So Naomi, I'm going to give you a little warning. We're going to go into breakout rooms in a minute here, and I'm going to give you all instructions about what we're going to do in our breakout rooms. So now you all have thought about for yourself, what is the perfect PB&J sandwich? Now I want you to imagine you're opening a restaurant and you're putting something on the menu. You've gotten a sense, you've looked over the chat, you've gotten a sense that there's lots of different ideas about what the perfect sandwich might be. I want you to just go into a breakout room and talk with a partner for 90 seconds, where it's going to be quick in, quick out. Discuss how you're going to address all of these different preferences and how you're going to decide what's going to go on your menu on your perfect PB&J sandwich. Are you going to add hot sauce for Sarah Taub, or how are you going to deal with that? All right. So, hey, welcome back, folks. All right. I'm gonna call on a couple people. I want to hear what you guys talked about. Michael Barnett, I saw your face earlier. Will you tell us a little bit about what you talked about in your breakout room? How are you going to solve this problem?
Well, it's it sounds like an unsolvable problem, but we talked about a restaurant that had like 3 of everything. It was sort of a 3 types of breads, 3 types of peanut butters, 3 types of jams. You know, it's kind of like going into Chipotle or something, and you sort of pick out what you want, and then we'll grill it for you or serve it cold or however you want at the end of the line. But that was our way of coming to terms with all those options.
Love it. Love it. Thanks, Michael. And appreciate you kind of going first right out of the breakout room. Keisha, I'm wondering if in your group, you guys had a similar idea to Michael's group or something different.
We were similar, but we said depending on what our goal and purpose was, like if my goal is to, you know, appeal to the most people and make the most money, then I might do a survey and figure out what people want and have that on the menu. Or if my, you know, goal is to appeal to, like, you know, to have that be a standout dish, I might bring in somebody really creative and come up with some sort of unique spin on it. And then we were like, well, we might as well just open up a peanut butter and jelly restaurant where you have like a bar of everything and you can just order it how you want it made.
I love it. Thanks, Keisha, for sharing. I swear to God, this was not supposed to be a metaphor for a palliative care consult, but I love that you all walked right into it and you're like, well, what are our deepest goals and values here? Amazing. Brittany, Kaufer, anything you want to add to what you've heard so far?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. The group couldn't hear me, but I caught the tail end for group 1, and there was similar discussion about having a like fast casual sort of restaurant model. So I think everybody was on a similar wavelength there.
Nice. Okay. Anybody have any other like totally different out of the box ideas that wants to share?
Hey, Chris.
I just want to say you put me in a room with Kyle, and so I just was able to reflect on my own on what was happening. But I'm going back to the palliative care metaphor because all I could think of was I'm going to call this shop May Contain Peanuts. And I am in a palliative care team, which might be the only one left in the world that is called a palliative care team and not something else. So it's just a metaphor.
Love it, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, so thinking about this diversity of sandwich preferences and how you might resolve that, we're going to take the learning, the reflections that you just had. I want you to go back to your original writing that we did at the top of this hour, that 1-minute reflection. And I want you to see if there's any revisions you want to make. We're just going to take 30 seconds to go back to what you originally wrote and see if there's any changes that you want to make, edits to how you describe on your menu the perfect PB&J sandwich. Take 30 seconds to do that. It's 5 more seconds here. Okay, great. Hopefully you all have a great business strategy now for your PB&J restaurant. We're so excited to taste them. Please send us pictures of the final products. And thank you for playing along with us. What we're really trying to do here is highlight some teaching strategies from a program that Amy and I went through with an organization called Teach Like a Champion, which is all about creating evidence-based learning tools to use in classrooms to keep learners engaged. That's one of the big principles of their work, increasing learner engagement. And they do that. And a lot of the skills that we use that we're going to unpack and process and talk about together are really trying to meet 2 different ratios that improve learner engagement. The first ratio that we're thinking about on this graph is a think ratio. Do we have everyone in the room thinking and engaging with the content in a meaningful way? So are you just listening to me talk? Or are you actually participating in your own thinking and maybe even deeper, more complex thinking over time about a particular concept to really learn the material and engage in long-term memory building? So that's the thinking ratio. We're trying to increase that. At the same time, we're trying to increase the participation ratio. Is it, again, just me talking, or is it the one-star student who always raises their hand first and talks, or is it the entire community of a classroom who's really engaged in the learning? So what we're trying to do is increase the amount of thinking that's happening in the group and the number of people participating in the group towards this upper hand goal, where we're really maximizing possibly can. So this is what they're really focused on. And we're going to talk about 3 techniques today that we've used a little bit in our practice session and that we're going to practice a little bit together. So first, I just want everyone to take a moment and in the chat, don't hit send yet, but write in the chat, what are some things that you observed Amy and I use as teaching skills that might have increased the thinking ratio and participation ratio? Take 15 seconds, write a couple things in the chat. Don't hit send yet. I'll tell you when to hit send. All right. If you've got a couple things, go ahead and hit send. Let's see what folks noticed. Oh, I love when they come in so quickly here. All right. Let's see. Hadley calling on participants, using some cold call, as Amy sort of talked about right at the top, thinking in pair share, everyone writing, some small group work, a universal topic, great. Giving the opt-out options for those who aren't comfortable participating, setting expectations, the warning about cold call again, so using that cold call, calling out people specifically. So again, a lot of noticing in the cold call, these ways of sort of engaging participants in the group. So hopefully you are seeing some of the themes, and you actually named a number of the things that we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to start with that first one about writing.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So our first topic we're going to talk about is this concept of everybody writes. And there are really 2 sort of ways to use writing in your teaching to increase your think ratio and your participation ratio. And we used both of them in that PB&J, or at least we tried to use both of them in that PB&J example. So the first one is formative writing. And this is the idea of using writing to actually have your students think deeper about a concept. They're actually developing some of their own ideas or thoughts or opinions through writing. And so an example of a formative writing question might be, something like, what are some potential indications of high blood pressure in this moment? Just take 20 seconds to jot down some thoughts. And you'll notice the specific language here is to kind of lower the stakes, to encourage thinking rather than writing to demonstrate something. I'm not having you write down something to prove that you know it. I'm having you write to think about what you might know and what questions you might have about a topic. That's opposed to summative writing, where we use writing more to crystallize their learning by writing sort of a final, fully formulated idea. And this I use oftentimes in my talks, sort of after we've had a discussion about something. I might say, okay, now I want you to write down sort of some formative thought about what we just talked about to help them crystallize their learning. And so this is where you might say something, write your diagnosis for this patient given a clear, including a clear rationale. And both of these are really important, and we'll talk about sort of the ways you can use both of them. But first, I want you all to practice for a minute. And so our goal here is to have you think about what your formative writing prompts might be. So I want you all to think about a lesson plan that you're working on, a talk that you have given or are giving or might give in the future. And I want you all to take 2 minutes to write out a couple formative writing prompts that you could use. Don't put them in the chat, just put them in your notebook. And I'll call on a couple of you. I'm actually gonna give somebody a heads up. I'm gonna call on Hadley first when we come out of our 2 minutes to have you share one. So I'll give you 2 minutes now to write your formative writing prompts. And I'll put the example back on the screen. Okay, maybe 10 more seconds. All right, Hadley, are you willing to start us off and share what you thought of?
Yeah, happy to. This might be a little bit literal, but I'm actually doing a talk next week for residents about Nolan's card writing. And so I think there are probably different ways to apply this question, but there is a potential to say, sort of like as a framing for the whole talk, like if think about a patient's family that you wished you could communicate with after their child died, what would you want to say? And then take the time to write about that, and then kind of lay out some of our frameworks and language suggestions.
Love that, Hadley. Thanks. So just think, putting you in a position, think about a family, right? I'm going to give you some specific place for your brain to go. Just think about what you might want to say, right? I love that. Teresa Bente, will you share yours? If you're able to unmute. And share.
So I recently gave a talk about special considerations for caring for adolescents and young adults. And so one of the questions that I could have used, and I think trying to build a framework to talk about some of the developmental milestones that are important when you consider tasks of adolescents, would be to ask the group to formally think about and name some of those developmental milestones across the board to kind of start as a launching point.
Great. And how would you make it, Teresa, how would you make that formative? How would you lower the stakes for something like that?
Sure. So I would say, I think I could go a number of different ways, but I could also say, think back to your own adolescence. What were some of the things that you felt were important milestones in your own development, or that you accomplished in your development during your adolescence?
Awesome. I love that. So maybe making it personal and kind of lowering the stakes by saying we all went through this. Just think about some of these stages. Thanks so much, Teresa, for sharing that. I'm just gonna, anybody else have any other example prompts that they would like to share, or something different than what we heard from Hadley and Teresa?
I actually, as a nurse, am interested in how they're doing themselves. So how do they envision self-care after a tough day?
So you're thinking about asking them to write about how they envision self-care?
Yep.
Yeah, I love that idea. And how might you make that formative? How might you lower the stakes to say there's no right answer? I just want you to write what you're thinking about.
Just how do you envision self-care after a tough day?
Great. All right. Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that one. So a couple of kind of key principles with this tool, Everybody Writes. One is using it frequently and using this formative structure where you're giving them short bursts. Just write down a few things you know about this, or you've thought about this, right? I just want you to take a minute to get your thoughts together. And doing this often can kind of help students or learners engage in the process throughout the entire talk. We also talk about this strategy called front the writing, where writing first at the very beginning then actually helps kind of shape everything that comes after it. And we did that with our PB&J lesson, where we had you write about it, and that kind of shaped the whole discussion afterward. Versus the revision at the end, which is this process where you're asking your learners to now use writing as a tool to refine their thinking and to continue to iterate on their thinking, which also helps them clarify and reinforce their understanding.
Okay, so one of the other strategies that you may have seen us use, and we're going to talk about now, is the use of wait time. So to get us thinking about wait times first, we're going to start with a question. And I want everyone to think about this question and write your answer in the chat without hitting send. Don't hit send yet, but on average, how long do you think instructors typically wait between asking a question and taking an answer? Write in the chat, don't hit send. We'll waterfall this cascading answers in a moment. All right. When you've got something, go ahead and throw it in the chat. Let's see what folks think. I'm seeing some 2, 5, 10, 15, 3, 27. Cool. So a range of different answers. Amy, do you want to show us what the research shows? 1.
Maybe it's different in palliative care.
Could be yeah, right. We have to account for the palliative the palliative care pause. But like in a standard classroom setting, it's about 1 second. So here's a follow-up question, and it's a little bit more of a complex question. So like take 20 seconds to really think about it. Is why do we think instructors, maybe even ourselves, may spend so little time waiting for a response? So take 20 seconds, and then if we wouldn't mind, I would love to hear from Catherine first when we come back in 20 seconds. Catherine, do you have an initial idea you want to share about why folks might take so little time?
I think people don't take a lot of time because it's uncomfortable to stand there or to on the Zoom format to sit there and look at a blank screen. But to stand there and look at people, and sometimes you just don't have the patience to, to stand there, like, because you feel like your talk or your session needs to move along, right? And so, but I think a lot of it has to do with the uncomfortableness, for the same reason that like doctors don't wait for a long time, between asking a question and then moving on to the next thing.
Sure. Okay. So that balance between this like personal discomfort and also this like sense of pressure, maybe that like the end of the session or the end of your patient visit and the next person that you have to get to, the next session you have to do. I love that. Does anyone have something they want to like reflect back to Catherine, to agree, add something different, maybe build off of that?
Hi, this is Gina.
Hi.
I'm wondering if people think that actually it was longer than 1 second, because I think we all have a warped sense of time. Like we were in there for hours, we were in there for 20 minutes. It was,
Great. Yeah. So maybe it's just like a sense of awareness when you're in front of a group and don't have a clear sense of time in quite the same way. I really love that. So part of what we're seeing here is like there's maybe some dynamics about like what it means to be this teacher role. And maybe there's some really personal aspects to this too, about how we are individually thinking about our own wait time. So we're going to play with this a little bit more, and we're going to talk first a little bit about why this works and how to kind of use it skillfully. So wait time, first off, it's important to be thinking about real and transparent think time. One, if I say I'm going to give you time to do something, I should probably actually give you the time to do it. And then be transparent about it, being able to say like, hey, there's some complexity here. I want us to actually take a few seconds to reflect on this question. Students really learners need time and space and sometimes silence to be able to process their thoughts and come up with sometimes with like maybe a deeper answer than just the first thing that comes to their mind, right? We're trying to get some more of that think ratio up by giving people space to digest something. So we're telling them we're gonna give you this space. So we're being really clear about that. We can also vary the means of participation. So I can tell you, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to silently think. I can also encourage you to turn and talk, kind of like we did in our breakout rooms. Talk to someone else to do some of that formative thought development, or a stop and jot, coming back to this writing idea of like, write it out. We're just going to take a quick, frequent burst of writing, write down some of those thoughts, and then we'll come back. So there's different ways we can engage instead of just using silence. Part of this is about slowing things down. When we think about that time pressure that we might feel, this is not about slowing down this whole session and drawing time out. It's about using small bits of time intentionally and effectively. And this comes in 2 parts. One, for us as teachers to really recognize if we can't tell time when we're standing in front of a class, like I can't right now, being able to say like, in my head, I'm going to count to 10. I'm going to give you time. I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to count to 10 silently and give that space. It's also about slowing down students a bit, because we all know, and maybe some of us are the student that feels like when I'm asked a question, my role is to come up with the right answer as fast as possible and get my hand in the air. One of the things that we do in that time is we call on that person frequently and over. We don't necessarily give that student time to process and really think about other possible answers, other possible ideas. We also decrease the amount of participation from the rest of the group and the voice equity of who's participating in a classroom. So this is about slowing down the process to make sure that we're including more people and richer thought. So we're going to practice this a little bit too. So we are going to do something that I hope feels a little fun and a little funny and a little uncomfortable. We're actually going to practice just doing a wait time. So I'm going to demonstrate this first, and then you're going to break out into pairs. We're going to go back into our breakout rooms, and you are going to take turns doing what I'm going to do right now, which is to practice nonverbals with a wait time. So I'm just going to ask the group, I'm going to say, the question is why? And then I'm counting to 10. Which may have felt like an eternity. That's all we're going to do. So the goal is to practice taking turns, just asking each other the question why, keeping an engaging presence, and then switching and let the other person ask. When we come back, I would love to hear from, let's see, Terry. Terry first. I'm going to have folks reflecting on what they saw their partners do well and skillfully in this wait time practice. Any questions about this before we go into breakout rooms?
Can I add one thing, Michael?
Please, Amy.
I think you can use this transparency here. This is a chance to practice the transparency. So the question you're asking is why, but you might start with, all right, this is a real hard question. I'm going to give you some time to think about it, so you can practice this sort of transparency piece before you get to the question as well.
Great. We're going to go into breakout rooms for just 40 seconds here to make sure folks have enough time to sit in that silence. We'll see you back here momentarily. Sorry if any in the room, if we interrupted your beautiful silence that you were holding, but thank you so much. Terry, if you wouldn't mind me going to you first, I'm curious, who were you partnered with?
I was partnered with Chris.
With Chris? Okay. Terry, can you tell us what Chris did to hold this space in a way that felt skillful and effective?
She normalized the space by saying, hey, this is a harder question, so I want you to take a little time to think about your response. And then she said, so the question is why?
Mm-hmm.
And then she stared at me, and so I stared at her too.
I love it. So using that transparency in sort of the setup, and then I like the way you retold that. There's this engaging, this genuine, I really want to know why.
Mm-hmm.
So using sort of this engaging, sort of nonverbal, or this sort of tonal way of saying I'm engaged. Thank you so much, Terry. And Chris, do you have any thoughts and feedback for Terry? Things that you saw Terry do skillfully that made this wait time feel really effective?
Well, we unfortunately ran out of time, so she didn't get to ask back.
Okay.
But I'll just share that it felt really uncomfortable, and I was trying to count in my head, but as time was going on, I was counting faster. I was like, I need this 10 seconds to be over. It's just really uncomfortable.
Well, around 8 seconds, right?
Staring at each other.
Yeah. I really appreciate the vulnerability of that reflection, because I think that's probably true for a lot of us, right? So being aware, holding this practice space as a moment of a potential awareness of how do I actually feel? How prepared do I feel to do this? Is this something I'm going to need to practice with and play with a little bit if I'm going to use it? Thanks, folks, for playing.
All right. So the last engagement strategy we've been using a lot of, and y'all have been very kind to us as we use it. This is cold call. So everybody take a minute and type into the chat, and don't hit enter yet. Why do we tend to avoid cold calling when we're teaching? Don't hit enter yet. Take a minute and think about it. All right. Thanks, Terry, for getting us started. Go ahead and hit enter. Send them in. Oh, love it. We're too nice in peds. We're worried about catching somebody off guard or embarrassing our learner. Sometimes there's some technical aspects of it. I don't actually know anybody's name. Michael and I actually taught this session earlier today and we didn't know anybody's name and it wasn't on Zoom. So we had to work around that. Oh, some of us have traumatic memories of it from when we were learners. I think there's a thread of like psychological safety around this, right? Like, is my learner going to be safe if I call on them? These are amazing thoughts. Thanks. And also a change from previous times. Yeah. Thanks, you guys. So now take a minute again and put into the chat, but don't hit enter. What are the benefits of cold calling? Don't hit enter yet. Just give it some thought. All right, and go ahead and send them in. Gina says maybe there's an adrenaline rush. Betsy, will you unmute and share a little bit? I love what you put, getting a variety of answers. What do you mean by that, Betsy?
Just that a lot of times it's only the same people who respond. And I think if you call on people, you're sort of forcing some different answers and different thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Betsy. Rachel, tell me more. Folks can get their minds and hearts ready to answer, and others might feel relieved. Tell me what you're thinking there, Rachel.
Well, for folks that might be like true introverts or that might, be the one saying, please don't cold call on me, please don't cold call on me. Maybe it allows them to be like, okay, someone else is going to be called on. And then they are able to engage in the exercise in a different way because they're not holding in their minds, like, am I going to be called on? So maybe there's benefit for other folks, while also then if they are the person cold called, maybe it gives them a little time and space to take a breath and get ready to answer.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Love that. And Terry, can I ask you, Terry, you said, I really like what Michael said before about voice equity, and there's value in making sure everyone is seen and heard. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I hadn't heard that term before, so I'm gonna steal it and use it next week. But what I really he said that one of your slides says something about not always calling on the person who raises their hand first. And I am one of those people that has to process stuff slower. So a lot of times by the time I process it, the speaker has moved on to the next question and I have just formulated my thought. So it looks like I'm not participating, but I really am participating. It's just, I didn't get a chance to share my view or my counterpoint. So I really, really like that idea of making sure, just because the person isn't raising their hand right then and there doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have something really, really important to share. Just may need a little more time. They may need that wait time to be before. Yeah. And if you make everybody wait, it doesn't seem like one person is taking longer. So I really like it.
Thanks so much, Terry. That's amazing. And I love you all pointed out a number of sort of the benefits that we see of introducing some safe cold calling into your teaching. One is this culture of attention and accountability, right? And of course, this is a culture shift. How many of you were coming here today? Maybe you've come to expect something better from NIPSI, but how many of you were coming here today expecting to just like, learn by osmosis? Like, I'll just turn that Zoom meeting on and I'll learn something from it, right? So this is different. I just want to call that out, but really we're sort of setting this intention around a culture of we all are going to be paying attention. If you're going to spend an hour with me, we're going to actually work together to learn something. You're also checking for understanding, right? If you have one person, if you have that same person who's answering every single question, you might think, gosh, I'm such a good teacher. Everybody gets it, right? Because that same person is just getting the question right. But this is a way to actually check in with other folks in the group to get a sense of, how effective is my teaching? Are people getting what I'm trying to say? It supports pacing. It's a way, especially used with wait time, to help you then move the conversation along rather than having to wait for that awkward time to figure out who's going to talk next, especially on Zoom. How are we going to navigate this? Who's going to unmute? And then the last point is that one Terry really hammered home, which is this concept of voice equity. And I love, there's some really fascinating literature from the sort of elementary education space around culturally responsive education. And one of the things they really talk about is that that truly there are a few things more inclusive than asking for somebody's opinion or their input, than telling them you value what they have to say. And so to ask a student who has not volunteered, who has not spoken in a safe way, what do you think? Is to tell them that their voice matters and you care what they have to say. And so for me, this is really what has helped me kind of get over the hump of the idea of using cold call, is by saying, I am actually really showing people in my words and actions that I care what they have to say. I'm going to skip over that just for the sake of time. There's some data around this in a bunch of different age groups of learners. Really good, safe cold calling not only increases participation across the board, they've actually found that it increases voluntary participation. And so if you start this culture of cold calling, after a while, it just becomes, the culture becomes, we're all going to participate and be a part of this. And people actually volunteer more to participate. There's some interesting data around the gender participation gap in different educational settings. And it looks as though cold calling can actually eliminate or even flip the gender participation gap, in a sense that women are not participating as much or more as men, which is what the data has suggested in the past, at least, was not the case. And then, of course, we all mentioned, like, we don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. And there are good studies from the educational literature that say that if you do cold calling well and safely, you don't increase student discomfort. And so let's spend the last minute here thinking about, what does safe cold calling look like? So get out your chat box one more time and type into the chat, but don't hit enter. What might you do to create safety around using cold call? All right, go ahead and hit enter if you've got some thoughts here. Great. So Arka starting us off, preparing folks with a qualifier statement. Again, telling people you're going to do it, being really grateful for their answers, giving people that language around opting out, sharing, asking people about their thoughts and their experience rather than hard facts. That's great. It's a great way to do this when there are many right answers versus kind of just one right answer. Brittany noticed, like, we actually, sometimes we're varying up our use here, but sometimes, yeah, we're saying, when we come back, I'm going to call on X, Y, and Z person. That's another strategy to make it a little bit safer. Exactly. You can use that. Totally. Great. So here's just a couple of our thoughts on how to make cold call safe. One is the rollout speech. Again, you saw us do this a couple of times. I'm going to use cold call today. Here's what to do if you're not ready. It's no problem. We'll come back to you later. We talked about sort of positive affect, like when I call on you, gosh, Terry, I love what you put in the chat. Will you tell me a little bit more about it, right? So some kind of like, I'm really excited to hear what you specifically have to say. And then many of you mentioned this in the chat, the gratitude for whatever answer you get. Thank you so much. That makes a ton of sense. Reflecting it back in some way, using your palliative care skills, right? And then And then a number of you put in kind of thoughts about what kinds of questions you might use for this, and thinking about, particularly at the beginning, using questions that are maybe a little bit easier or not so complicated to answer. And then scaffolding, you know, adding in more either writing time or turn and talk time as the questions get more complex. So I think we're out of time, so we're going to skip our cold call rollout speech, and we're going to close it there. If folks are willing, just one last sort of question for you all. Type into the chat your answer to one of these 3 questions. After listening to these kind of teaching techniques, what's one thing that surprised you? One thing you're still wondering about? Or one thing you're planning on taking forward into your teaching next week? And go ahead and type these into the chat and hit enter whenever you're ready. Thanks, Robin. She's thinking about how do you do this on a bigger scale? People are thinking about taking forward safe cold calling. Awesome. And prepping for the cold call. Surprised how fun it felt to participate. Thanks, Rachel. These are great, y'all. Thanks so much. Michael and I took up all the time. If folks are, and also now craving of peanut butter and jelly, thanks, Hadley. If folks have questions, we'll stay on. And then Naomi, if you haven't, do you have any announcements for HPM or anything you want to share?
I guess since I've had problems with technology, I can't rely on that. If anyone is going to be in Montreal for AHPM next week, we're going to have an in-person NIPSI get together. So if you haven't received the RSVP, please send me an email and then I'll send it along your way.
Thursday evening.
Next Thursday evening. We're really excited to get together in person.
And if you won't be there at AHPM, we will miss you, and we will see you again for the next session here on May 16th, which will be around best practices and examples of simulation-based education.
Thanks for playing today, everybody. Good to see you all.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I was just curious if you had any phrases that you find particularly useful if you do cold call a learner and you get, you know, no response, or you just get panic, or just in your experience, anything that's worked well that we can like steal.
You want to go, Michael? Oh, you're muted.
I think
Mute
whatever.
yourself and
I think maybe maintaining that positivity, maintaining that sort of like generous spirit, and like maybe even just like naming like if they're having a hard time even saying like maybe come back to me, maybe you can offer that to them. So like, you know, do you want us to like come back? Like, do you need another minute to think about it? Like, we're happy to come back to you. So like offering like a little bit of an out. I think there's a variety of ways, and like maybe it's a little individual to the student. But that could be one strategy. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Amy, do you have another idea?
Yeah, I think, Kristen, a lot of it is like using your palliative care skills, right? Like just sort of the acknowledge and normalize it. Like, God, you know, it can be hard to get called on, and it can feel funny if you're not ready. No worries. Happens to all of us. You know, how about you? Michael, do you have an idea? And just kind of normalize it and move on. Sort of the acknowledge and pivot teaching skill. All right, y'all. We'll let you go. Enjoy your afternoon. Thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks for having us.